Hi, this is Leander from functioneeltrainen.be, and in this episode of my industry expert interview series, I'm lucky to talk to Gary Gray from the Gray Institute. Gary could be seen as the father of applied functional science and is a renowned international speaker at conferences all over the world. Today I'm talking with him about the Gray Institute, the use of the functional movement screen, the assessment of the human body, the dangers of a unilateral sport, and much more. I'm pretty sure this will be one of the most interesting talks I'll have in the next few weeks. Okay, so let's go and hang out with Gary. Thanks for doing this interview, Gary. I did a few interviews already with guys like Frank Forensic from Exuberant Animal and Arwan Lakor from MoveNet, but I've got to say this is one of the interviews I was really looking forward to do.
Well, Leander, it's a privilege to just understand your passion and what you're doing in Belgium, and any way we can contribute, we'd love to. So I appreciate this opportunity.
Nice. I have some very interesting questions for you, and I'm sure you will be able to enlighten me with your answers. So let's go to the first question. Gary, you are the founder of the Gray Institute. Can you talk about your education programs and what it is that you do at the Gray Institute?
Yes, the Gray Institute basically was formed almost 40 years ago now. It didn't really get its name for a few years, but we're dedicated to the same thing I think you're dedicated to, and that's the pursuit of truth, the pursuit of understanding how the human body moves and how it functions, and the pursuit of then how do we take that information and help other people? How do we understand the beauty of the human body, and then how do we use that education to create environments where we can help others? So the Gray Institute is kind of dedicated towards an ongoing pursuit of understanding what we call applied functional science, the science of human movement, in order to do exactly what you guys are doing in Belgium, and that's trying to do the best you can to help as many people as you can. What's
your educational background?
I'm an old guy now, so I'm not even sure if I can remember that. But I was first of all educated as a physical therapist, and then I became a athletic trainer, and then I became a strength coach, and then I became a personal trainer. And of course, I realized throughout the whole pursuit that we're all kind of the same. We all do very similar things in very similar ways, and we have our own little expertise, which allows us to individualize a little bit of what we do. But when it's all said and done, you and I are probably exactly the same. Obviously, I'm a little older and you're better looking. So other than that, we're probably dead on the same.
So you offer several education packages. Can you talk about that?
Yes, we started out years ago starting with a course called When the Foot Hits the Ground, Everything Changes. And that was a seminar to emphasize that the body functions different when it's roaming around as opposed to the way we learned it, and that's on a table. So, for example, on a table, your hamstring does flex the knee, but standing, it actually extends the knee. So every muscle functions different, every joint functions different, and every nerve functions different when we stand and move. But most of us learn a very static, isolated, on-table approach. And so we started years ago with that, and then started a seminar 26 years ago called Chain Reaction. And that was based on the biomechanics of the human body, how the foot bone's connected to the knee bone, and we still offer that. The seminars kind of morphed into people wanting more information, so we created 48 functional video digests on various topics. And then we did 12 videos called Fast Function, which is a little more concise, a little more about flexibility, about strength, about balance, about power, about endurance, about resiliency, about motivation, about encouragement, about all that kind of stuff. And then we started 8 years ago our mentorship program, our 40-week mentorship program, which is called GIFT. So this is our in our 7th year of GIFT, where literally we have 24 countries from all over the world represented, where professionals just like yourself want to go really deep. We recently completed an online certification called Certification in Applied Functional Science. It's a 25-hour online that introduces people to what we call the observational and movement essentials. What do you really need to know when you're out on the floor as a personal trainer to be effective? What do you need to know about function, and what are some of your opportunities?
So is this the education program you would advise for starting personal trainers then?
Yes, I would. I think if I was, especially in Belgium, and you wanted to get introduced a little bit to who we are and how we think, I think the CAFS would be the best way to get started, because it complements what you're already doing. A lot of times you learn something and you almost have to throw out what you're already doing. But in reality, what we're finding is if you're already doing something worthwhile, we just want to make it better.
Okay.
And so if you're already successful, you already have passion as a personal trainer, this would probably be where we'd want you to start. Then you'd kind of say, well, maybe I'll get some videos, maybe I'll consider the gift program. We're developing our own, what we call a global movement screen that'll be available in a couple of months.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do is respond to the industry and say, what can we do to serve you?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we got going. So we've got a lot of cool things going on. Probably our biggest thing is our online free-to-play at F2P Academy, which is free. So it teaches you the top 140 matrices. It teaches you the applied functional science. You get all the nomenclature for free. You get the strategies of applied functional science for free. You learn the sign language that goes together with everything.
Nice.
And at the end of the day, it empowers all of us to hopefully perspire to inspire. In other words, get a little better so we can help each other. And obviously, that's why I'm excited about what you're doing. You can tell that you're working your butt off in order to make it better for everybody else around you. So I really appreciate that.
Thanks. Thanks. It means a lot. Okay, first real question. A lot of trainers think that if they use tools like Swiss balls and the TRX, they are training on a functional manner. But what is functional? When do you know that what you're doing is functional, and where do you draw the line between what's functional and what's not?
You started with the toughest one, which is good. I think the best way to answer that is the greatest trainers in the world, if they're doing functional training, interestingly enough, do not use tools. Because anytime you look at an environment, the more authentic the environment, the more the functional training is. So, for example, if I'm doing functional training for balance, and I want to have better balance when I walk, you have to look at the authenticity of walking and say, what tools are attached to me when I walk? And the answer is nothing.
Yeah.
So I'm not on a Bosu ball. I'm not hanging onto a Viper. I'm not in a true stretch. I'm not suspended by anything. And so as soon as you start adding tools, you're getting further away from pure function.
Okay.
So if I want to walk better, if I want to squat better, if I want to dance better, if I want to hit a golf ball better, I have to first of all say, functionally, what does the body require to do that better? And then I can then ask the question, if I happen to add a tool, why am I adding it? Why am I introducing something artificial? Even a free weight's artificial. Even a dumbbell's artificial. It's not the same as picking up a box. And so what we have to do is say, if we want to be the best in the business as a personal trainer, we have to ask ourselves, could we do it in an empty room where there's only gravity, there's only ground reaction force, there's only mass and momentum, there's only our client, and the only other thing that's there, which is the most important thing, would be you. It'd be you, the personal trainer who understands function. Then if you scratch your head and go, but I want to tweak it a little bit, and here's why I want to tweak it, then you may introduce a tool. You may introduce something, and that's coming from somebody who's actually invented a few tools. So again, I'm not picking on tools. I'm picking on the thought process that says, you know, get certified in a tool and then try to get everybody to do it. So if I have a heavy rope and I want to use it to make you a better golfer, I got to figure out, well, what position should you be in? What should I do with the heavy rope? What part of the golf swing am I trying to improve? And why am I using that tool to facilitate the chain reaction that I want? So the long answer is the best of the best only use tools when necessary.
So is there a certain strategy you follow to get to a certain exercise for a certain sport?
You bet it. Yeah. And in fact, I think that's the gold. You're very good at asking questions because you're getting to the nuts and bolts really quick, which I appreciate. Every movement, every function that the human body does has what we call a transformational zone. So, for instance, if you stood up right now and I told you to jump, you wouldn't go up first, you'd go down first.
Yeah.
And so that process of your body going down and then changing directions to go up is called a transformational zone. Your body's transforming into something that's falling to something that's jumping, something that's loading to something that's exploding.
Okay.
Walking has the same thing. Throwing a ball has the same thing. Swinging a golf club or a tennis racket has the same thing. Punching has the same thing, where we load to explode. And so the strategy is we should assess in the transformational zone of the function that we're after. We should train in the transformational zone of the function we're after, and we should tweak. So, for example, if I want to throw something and I want to strengthen myself, I have to ask myself, what position are my feet in, what position are my hands in, and how would I load it in order to throw a ball better? Because that would be the goal of that function. And so understanding the transformational zone, you would then be able to say the strategy I use, the truth is real function, real mobility, real proprioceptive input, real muscle function occurs primarily in the transformational zone. That's the truth. The strategy, as you just said, therefore, is I better assess and I better train and I better rehab and I better condition in the transformational zone. The technique, therefore, will look like movement, loading and exploding in various ways with various tweaks, with various observational abilities and various movement abilities in the transformational zone. So then I have to sit back and go, which tool would be appropriate to load or enhance my transformational zone movement in order to enhance function? So we spend at the Gray Institute most of our life studying transformational zones.
Okay. And how important are the myofascial lines in this story?
Huge. The myofascial lines, the muscles, the bones, the nerves, everything's important. Here's the good part. Nothing's more important than the other. So you might say, well, I'm really good at the myofascial. I know the myofascial lines and stuff. We would still simply say, well, if you want to facilitate the appropriate myofascial lines, let's say something as simple as a golf swing, and you want to facilitate the myofascial line coming through the left foot, the left hip, through the thoracic spine to the right shoulder, you would say, well, of course I do. And then I would say, great, how are you going to do it? And now you have to answer this question. What's the subtalar joint doing on the left? What's the mid-tarsal joint doing? What's the left hip doing in all three planes of motion? And tell me what the thoracic spine's doing in all three planes of motion. Because if you can't load in all of those movements at those joints and three planes of motion, you won't facilitate the appropriate reaction of the myofascial lines. Okay. So it's like, yeah, everything's important. The good news is the human body is integrated that one thing is not more important than the other. I can't just say, well, I'm just doing a myofascial approach or a muscular approach or an osseous approach or a proprioceptive approach or a capsular approach, or we can't, the human body says you better approach it all. So to make it simple on our brain, the approach has to be a movement science transformational zone approach, because if you get the right movement, guess what? You'll have the right reaction of the myofascial lines, and you'll get the right reaction of the proprioceptors that are embedded in the myofascia, and therefore you won't have to worry about waiting until we understand everything there is about fascia and myofascia, because we'll never know that. That's a mystery that will be out there long after we die. So we have to say, between now and that mystery, what do we want to know? We have to be movement scientists. We have to understand movement better than anybody else in the world, because people come to us and say, hey, get me to move better. Get me to move with less pain. Get me to move with more efficiency and more effectiveness. Just simply get me to move. So we have to be the best at evaluating movement, assessing movement, enhancing movement, facilitating movement, and causing the transformational reaction of movement. And so it's very important.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up. Last week I was a speaker at a conference, and at the same time as my session about client communication, there was another guy doing his session about the use of the functional movement screen.
Okay.
So how useful do you think this functional movement screen is, and what would you recommend trainers to use to assess the human body?
Well, again, that's an easy question to answer if we start with the truth again. So if the truth is we move in 3 planes of motion or 3D, that's the truth. Can't deny that. If we're a chain reaction, can't deny that. If gravity has a huge influence on us, can't deny that. And if what we want to assess is in the transformational zone, biomechanically we can't deny that, then it doesn't matter what your screen is called. What I will ask you is, what movements do you want to assess to determine what you want to do with your client? A great screen allows me to empower you. A great analysis tool, a great scan gives me the tools to say, what does Leander need today? What are her gift? What is his gifts? What can he do best? And what perhaps are some of his barriers? And so a great screen says, let's start with the truth. Let's not start with something that Reebok came up with. Reebok came up with the movement screen years ago. And again, the question would be, how smart is Reebok relative to function? Well, by looking at their screen, if you looked at the truth first, you'd go, they're kind of 0 for 20. Because you lay on your back and you lift your leg up, you ask, what do I learn from that? And the answer would be, not much, if anything. Yeah, it might be symmetry, asymmetry, but I can stick my finger in my right ear, and then I can stick my finger in my left ear, and I can evaluate whether that's symmetrical or not. But it's movement that doesn't mean anything to me. So like if I get down on all fours and I point like a pointer dog, it's not fair to say that's good or bad. It's simply fair to say, is that the functional movement that I would like to see my client do to determine what I want to do with them next?
Yeah.
So a lot of people are out there questioning a lot of tradition, and a lot of things that we've done, a lot of things personal training groups have done with body mapping and functional movement screens and things. It's kind of traditional stuff that we go, that makes absolutely no sense to us. Very traditional balance test is, can you stand and balance on one foot for as long as you can? And we would look at that and go, that's probably just the opposite of what we want to do. We want to study balance in the transformational zone. So instead of saying, well, it's a good or bad screen, what I would challenge personal trainers, physical therapists, chiropractors, athletic trainers, any type of movement specialist, physical therapists to look at is, when somebody comes to you and you say, how can I help you, please? They will say, I need your help to get me to move better. Then the next question would be, so what do you need to do and what do you like to do? I need to work in a factory and lift heavy boxes, and I would like to go play tennis. Yep. Immediately, we have to evaluate them in the transformational zones of lifting and in the transformational zones of the 3 main swings in tennis: forehand, backhand, and overhead serve.
Yeah.
So then we go, so does any of those movements in that particular screen get me there? The answer is no, none of them do. None of them have anything to do with those 2 things that they just asked me about. Yeah. So should I waste my time on doing it, or do I have a better strategy? Do I have something better that I can help them with? We would say there's a better strategy. So again, a lot of people want to start with something, at least start with something. We would say start with something that'll benefit your client. Don't start with something that's convenient for you. So if you get certified in a certain screen and you go, well, at least I know how to do this, that's not the answer. The answer is, what does Leander need? What's your passion, and what can I help you with? Because we'd rather start with that. We'd rather end with that. So you start with the truth. Strategy reflects the truth. Your technique, therefore, will look entirely different than what's out there right now.
Yeah. I thought I heard you say earlier that you and the Gray Institute were working on a system to assess the body.
Very good. Yes, we are.
Can you tell anything about this yet, or
sure,
is
sure.
it still top
it's
secret?
yeah. Actually, I bet you by the time we hang up, I bet you could figure it out. Because again, we didn't start with tradition. We didn't go to Reebok or Nike or somebody who doesn't know anything about function. And we didn't say, well, what's been going on for the last 10 or 20 years? What we do at the Gray Institute is we understand how stupid we are. That's a gift we have. There's so many people out there brighter than us, but what we want to do is say, okay, knowing how dumb we are, let's start with nothing. Let's challenge everything. Let's basically assume that we don't know what we're talking about and everybody else doesn't know what they're talking about. Let's put us on equal ground. And then we say, let's start with the truth. So we would start in our, what we would call, we don't know even what we're going to call it yet, but let's say it's a global movement analysis that will immediately let me help you understand, can you lift and can you play tennis? Immediately. So I would have to say, what is the common denominator of lifting and tennis for most human movement? Well, it's upright function, bingo. It's three-dimensional function, bingo. It has to be driven in all three planes of motion by the hands and feet because those are drivers, bingo. We need to be relative to gravity, ground reaction force, mass and momentum consistent, bingo. Has to be a chain reaction, can't be an artificial isolated like I lay on my back and just lift my leg and just check the hip and the sagittal plane and say I have some information. We would never do that. And immediately, but it has to be simple. It has to be something that if I came to you, Leander, and I'd say, okay, here's what I'd like to do. I'm an old guy. I want to be able to pick up my grandchildren, but I still do triathlons and I still like to play basketball. You got to go, okay. Got to get this guy to be able to lift in the transformational zones. I got to get this guy to be able to run. This little booger's got to swim without dying. He's got to be able to load his legs in the bike. And plus, he just told me he also wants to play basketball, which is a bunch of different transformational zones. Where should I start?
Yeah.
We would start with a pure global movement assessment scan that within literally 5 minutes, you would look at me and say, Gary, I got a gift for you. And the gift would be based on what I showed you, not on a number. So if you looked at me and you took me through a bunch of arbitrary tests and say, you have a 23. I go, now what? And you go, I have no idea. But you got to, that's not going to help me. I want to say, Gary, guess what? The frontal plane of your hip, really I can benefit, and that's going to help you with your side-to-side movement. It's going to help you with your running. It's going to help you with your basketball. It's certainly going to give your legs and your trunk more strength when you pick up your grandchildren. So I got a gift I can give you today, and I'm pretty excited about it. We as personal trainers have to have the professionalism to say, we're not going to let other people tell us what to do with our clients. We want to be smart enough to figure it out ourselves. That's when you don't get burnt out. That's when you go home with a smile on your face. That's when you go home empowered. That's when you go home and say, you know what, I understand this where I get to be significant to my client. If it's as easy as putting them through some type of a screen that a third grader could do and give them a number 1, 2, or 3, at the end of that you go, so now what did I do? And the answer is, I'm not sure. In fact, again, I don't know what your thoughts are, but at the end of the presentation, you're scratching your head going, I don't get it. And most of us are going, I don't get it. Again, it's not a cut on people who present it. It's not a cut on the system itself. It's just a challenge to say we don't believe it's movement and we don't believe it's functional. So therefore, it'd be hard for us to call it something functional, something movement, something scan. It certainly is something. You're certainly stepping over a hurdle, pointing like a pointer dog, laying on your back, lifting your leg. We don't quite understand it. Maybe we're just not smart enough to understand it, but we think based on our 40 years of experience, we think we will have something where you'll get a big grin on your face and go, well, of course, this is the way to do it. So we're excited.
I'm really looking forward to looking in on that. Ido Portal, do you know the guy? He's a well-known functional movement artist, and he talks about how scapular stabilization is far more important than core stability. Can you agree with this statement, and can you tell us how you would advise trainers to train the core?
Yes. I probably can't agree or disagree because I'm not really sure what he means by that, but let's define a couple words. In the Gray Institute, Applied Functional Science defines stabilization as control of movement. Some people define stabilization as you hold a bone back and you can hold it still. Yeah. So, for instance, somebody say, well, I have a stable core because I can get on all fours and I can point my foot out, my leg out, and not move. We would say that the function would disagree with that because stabilization is control of movement. So, for instance, if we talk about the scapula, we would say the scapula moves in all three planes of motion.
Okay.
But then we'd ask a simple question. What makes it move? If your scapula moved right now, I'd go, why did it move? Well, if you just wiggled it, I'd go, that's not very functional because that's not how your scapula moves. But if you scratch your head right now, your scapula moved. And then I would say, interesting. So what controls the movement of your scapula? Well, interestingly enough, the scapula is the core, and the core is the scapula. So to say one's more important than the other is to say that my right foot's more important than my left foot. They would disagree. To say that my hip is more important than my shoulders,
Okay.
they would disagree. Controlling of scapula movement is something that needs to be controlled just like hip movement, just like thoracic spine movement. So if you got time, I'll throw a tough one at you. Okay, so here's a great example. If I take my right hand, and again, the Gray Institute has come up with three-dimensional nomenclature, which I think is going to empower the world to understand function. So, for instance, if there's not videotape available and somebody's listening this to a podcast, if I just simply said, okay, I'm going to do a left foot, left lateral rotational lunge with the right hand, left rotational reach at knee height, hopefully all of us in function would know exactly what we're talking about. The bad news is very few of us do.
Yeah.
So what I did is I said in three-dimensional space, my left foot's going to go somewhere in a triangulation. My right hand's going to go somewhere, and it's going to cause a chain reaction in my body. So the question would be, can you tell me what the transformational zone analysis of my left hip is, of my thoracic spine, and my right scapula? Well, believe it or not, people who study function would say, sure, your left hip went through flexion, it went through adduction, and went through internal rotation. Your thoracic spine went through flexion, it went through rotation to the left, and basically based on how far I reach with my right hand, basically created lateral flexion to the right, which is a type 1 motion. And at the same time, my scapula followed the rib cage, it has to, and it basically loaded in the transverse plane with rotation to the left. Because of that reach, it basically is laterally flexion as well, and it's going through a sagittal plane motion. So here's the question. What creates stability of my right scapula? Answer, every muscle in my body. My left posterior tib, my soleus, my rotators of my hip, not only my abdominals, but my thoracolumbar fascia, my rector spinae. Then obviously some of the obvious ones would be the rhomboids, the latissimus, the infraspinatus teres, my cervical muscle. So stability is the ability of a muscle to decelerate a motion and bring it back to where it wants to go. So as soon as I make that reach, you'd go, well, what the heck are you doing that for? Well, that's the exact motion I'm going to go through with a low backhand load for a backhand return of serve in tennis.
Yep.
And so the question then would be, well, what's more important? The ability of the core to decelerate, the hips, the thoracic spine, and the shoulders, or the ability of the scapula to decelerate? That's not even a good question to ask, because it's like, what's more important, to slow the ribs down, the scapula down, the humerus down, the pelvis down, the femur down, the tibia down, the talus down? And the answer in function would be, we better know how to slow them all down to decelerate in the transformational zone and bring them back. So to say that scapula stabilization, again, I don't know what the gentleman means by that, would be more important or less important than something else would be fairly, in least function, would be an ignorant statement. It doesn't understand how the body really functions.
I'm having an interview soon with Justin Price from the biomechanics method next week.
Sure.
And in his education program, he talks a lot about the importance to have alignment in the human body. But isn't this alignment different for everybody?
Keep talking.
Well, one of the things Ida Patel says in his Movement X campaign is that if you're not able to get out of alignment, you are weak. So what's your take on this, Gary?
So far I'm buying your book. It's really the greatest athletes don't ever stay in alignment. And alignment, it again has to be defined. So maybe I don't understand Justin's description of alignment, which definitely would be possible, because all the people that you've mentioned so far are brilliant. These are wonderful people. But again, you have to start out with the truth of function. So if you say, well, my spine should be aligned, my scapula should be aligned, my cervical spine should be aligned, my head should be aligned, my pelvis should be aligned, my legs should be aligned, I'd go, what does that mean? Because you just said it best. If I line 100 people up, we all have different alignments. We've all been given different gifts, different proportions of our body, different tone of the neurological system. So, and again, we fell into this trap years ago where, people said, well, to protect the knee, you have to keep it in alignment. You have to keep it aligned over the foot and aligned under the hip. That might be the kiss of death, because if you could keep it there, which you can't, then you're not allowing the hip and the foot to actually turn on the muscles to decelerate it when it, quote unquote, goes out of alignment. Yeah. And so every move we make, every breath we take, every sport we participate in, our body should be constantly out of alignment. And interestingly enough, when it goes into the transformational, so the movement I just said to you, that left foot, left rotational lunge with the right hand, left rotational reach at knee height. Basically, am I in alignment right now? No, I'm so whopper-jawed, it's crazy. But then when I explode and come out of it, should I ever be in alignment? Answer, no. Because now I'm going to go to the other extreme of the transformational zone, and I will be, quote-unquote, out of alignment. Now, if somebody says, well, I think I can use alignment to determine when you're kind of relaxed and neutral, if that gives me an indication of your functional capability, most studies have proven that not to be true. Some of the best feet function and that they're not in alignment when they're at rest. Some of the best spines function and they're not in alignment at rest. They have this kind of disposed ability to get into this load and explode. So again, I think I might be confusing what alignment means, but your car's in great alignment when it's in neutral, but push on the gas, it's going nowhere. I have to either kick it into drive or kick it into reverse. And so I would, if you came to me, if you asked me, are you going to spend any time on my alignment? I would probably say very little, if any, because that doesn't let me know how you move. I'm going to spend time in your transformational zones. I want to see how well you get into them. I want to see how well you get out of them. And then once you get out of them, will you go through neutral or will you go through your alignment to get to the other place? I'll be interested in that. Yeah. So if he's kind of using it as a reference point that you need to be able to go through it in your transformational zones, I would buy that. But if he stands you up or lays you down and say, we're looking at this certain alignment, this static postural alignment, I would probably say has never gotten us anywhere, and I'm not sure I would spend any undue time with that. So I'd probably go with your line of thought before I would go with that. But again, it's everybody kind of has their own thing,
I always think of when I see somebody, like, habit becomes anatomy, and if this person stands like this, is because they need this kind of posture and alignment for what they do as a habit, as like working in a factory. If they stand like this with protracted scapulas, then maybe that's what they need, and that's how the body became like this, to be better in their habit.
Yes. Well, interesting enough, you gave a great example. So let's say you look at me from the side and I'm kyphotic or my shoulders are rounded. And of course, we would say their alignment is not ideal if we used an alignment. Okay, that's anybody could figure that out. That doesn't take a rocket scientist. The $1 million question is two things. What caused their quote unquote malalignment according to your eyes? And number two, what are you going to do to get them out of it? If you believe you don't want them there. Yeah. And so that's the real question. So I'll give you a hint. The answer is, okay, what has driven them down into the kyphotic posture? And then the real answer is, what am I going to do to facilitate getting them out of that? Now, interestingly enough, applied functional science starts with understanding that muscles choose to be loaded before exploded. So for instance, if I presented to you kyphotic, bent over in the sagittal plane, and I would say, help me, applied functional science would say, well, they're not very successful in the thoracic spine, so don't start there. Don't tell them to stand up straight. Or don't concentrically have them squeeze their shoulder blades back and strengthen the back extensors of the shoulder blades muscles, because they just got done showing you they're not very good there. So a wise man would say, that's not a good place to start. So we would go, I wonder if their hips are contributing to it. And we already know that the hip flexors will be contributing to that forward posture. So we'd say, I wonder if I could give their hips a gift based on my transformational zone analysis that would then turn on the appropriate proprioceptors, that would turn on the muscles. Again, that's key to applied functional science. The brain doesn't turn on muscles. Movement turns on proprioceptors. Proprioceptors turn on muscles. So as we as personal trainers if we can facilitate the movement. So now I facilitate movement in your hip by doing a rotational reach at knee height. Those big, powerful hip muscles, when they load and when they explode back, I come back in the transverse plane, and now I facilitate a more upright posture, a more upright movement, that I'm now creating the reaction that I need to actually tell my thoracic spine, you're no longer welcome to stay in that flex posture. So applied functional science would say, start in a different plane of motion, start at a different joint, load before you explode, turn on as many proprioceptors as you can, let the body do it subconsciously, do it in 3 planes of motion, do it through the chain reaction, and guess what? It'll look entirely different than you're out of alignment, so I'm now going to do a correction to the alignment.
Yeah, because you're not addressing the root of the problem. I like that.
Bingo. You couldn't say it better. Why didn't you just say that at the beginning? You'd have saved us 5 minutes. That was perfect.
So, how feasible is it to try to get people into alignment, and people who have been wrongly shaped by desk jobs and sedentary lifestyle for decades? How can we as personal trainers have enough impact to create a difference, at which intensity and frequency should we train people to make that difference?
Well, again, it's the first thing, you attack the root word of functional. So I come to you, I've been sitting at a computer screen, I got kyphotic posture, tight hips, forward head posture, neck ache, my back hurts, but I still need to make a living, I still need to stare at my computer, and I come to you and say, help. And you go, the question you just said, what can I do with this person to help them? Well, first of all, you got to make it fun. First of all, you got to get my confidence, and you got to make it fun. Second of all, interestingly enough, if I'm not successful sitting, part of my transformational zone analysis will probably be sitting. So not only would you take them through what we would call our functional movement analysis of what their body can do standing against gravity, but I would really be intrigued what your function is while sitting. So we'll teach you how to apply that analysis while sitting.
Yeah.
And then we'll start with probably one of the most significant parts of applied functional science, and that's always start with success. So if I'm already not good at something, I'm already kyphotic, I'm already slumpy, the last thing you want to do is work on get me to be non-slumpy. Now you got to find something that I'm pretty good at, that I'll enjoy doing as part of my workout, that I'll instantaneously be successful. Because if you give me something that builds upon my success, and I'm successful at it, and I come back to you and work out with you again next week, and you go, wow, Gary, look how much you've improved already. Yeah. Then you have hooked me. I now love you. I now am confident in you. I now want you to be my trainer for the rest of my life. If you take something that you know I've been unsuccessful at for 40 years, and that's slumped over a computer looking at a screen, and you say, we're going to fix that today, you might as well teach me how to fly, because it ain't going to happen. You know, the root cause is too ingrained. There's too many factors. So we have to be smart enough as personal trainers to say, what's my ultimate goal here? Well, yeah, I want them comfortable sitting again. And I want better movement while sitting, not necessarily better posture while sitting. And I want them to enjoy what they want to enjoy. So I got to make it fun, and I got to make it functional. And so the same principles that we just talked about have to apply. It has to be 3D, has to be chain reaction, has to be subconscious, has to turn on movement, has to turn on proprioceptors, has to do it in the environment that you want me to be productive in. Obviously, I'm in sitting now, so part of my training is going to be actually sitting. And so it has to make sense. When the client smells that you're getting them to do what you ultimately want them to do without them knowing it, that's when they get this big grin on their face and they go, hey, wait a minute. You know more about function than anybody else in the world. You're actually tricking me into being successful, aren't you? And you go, yeah, we can call it tricking, or the Gray Institute calls it tweaking. But at the end of the day, it's what we call here in the United States during Halloween, trick or tweet. So we can tweak or tweet you any way we want.
Okay. So talking about fixing stuff, there's still little scientific evidence of the positive effects of SMR and foam rolling. What's your take on foam rolling, and how would you advise trainers to use it as opposed to static stretching?
Yes. Again, sometimes we get caught into studies that say this or that. We would say, the wise man would say paradoxically, yes. You know, should I do that or that? The wise man, many said, will say. So let's use a great example. Let's say hip flexors, for example. We know most of us have tight hip flexors. Why? Because we're tight right now. We're sitting. So, but they're tight in all three planes of motion. They're not only tight in the sagittal plane, but they're tight in the frontal and transverse. And then we have to ask ourselves, what normally drives a hip flexor to get long? Answer, your feet and your hands. Yeah. And in what posture? Standing. So would we rather go through a three-dimensional lengthening of the hip flexors in the sagittal, frontal, and transverse plane using the feet as drivers and the hands as drivers, or would we do a three-dimensional approach of compressing the tissue, let's say with the foam roller, in order to facilitate what we call a proprioceptive reaction to try to get the muscle to calm down while we're three-dimensionally stretching it? The answer would be yes. We would do both. We would say, okay, let's understand that if we foam roll this baby in the sagittal plane, and we foam roll it in the frontal plane, and we foam roll it in the transverse plane, that what are we doing with the foam rolling neurologically? What are we doing to the tissue itself? What are we doing to the fascia? What are we doing even to the osseous structures and even in the hip? What are we doing to the capsule? And after you foam roll, what do you immediately want to do to create the function you want? Well, the answer is you need to go through three-dimensional lengthening or eccentrically lengthening for the transformational zone. Then the question would be, now do we have anything else we do? Yeah, if you create motion without stability, i.e. the strength of the motion, you're wasting your time. So if you came to the Gray Institute and said, well, let's go after somebody's hip flexor, you would see a combination of appropriate 3D foam rolling, appropriate 3D lengthening using the hands and the feet as a driver. Then you'd see 3D strengthening to take advantage of that new motion. Then you'd see us integrated into their activity. So if they're playing tennis and they're using their hip flexor in an overhead serve, we would teach them the right transformational zone exercises to make them better at tennis. So when they left, they wouldn't say, well, Gary chose this or that or that or that. Gary said, he realizes I'm an individual. He realizes I needed help in my anterior hip, and he uses the best tools that he could think of, and one of those tools happens to be a foam roller. So that's how we would approach that.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. Thank you.
You bet.
The next questions I'm going to ask are sent in by our Belgian trainers for you.
Oh, good.
So Willem was one of the trainers. I think you know him. Willem Timmermans is
sure I do. He's one of my heroes.
Yeah. So he sent me this question yesterday. I see an increase of younger adults of minus 30 years old who suffer from osteoarthritis and joint wear at a younger age. A lot of times, doctors can't seem to find the cause of these problems. Isn't this a problem for old people to have? And what do you think could be the cause of this trend? Lack of movement or sedentary lifestyle, maybe?
So, well, again, he already knows the answer, so he's just setting me up on this one. So, great friends ask questions that we know we can all answer, and he probably would have a better answer. But the fact that, again, you start with the truth. The truth is, we are finding younger kids with arthritic changes.
Yeah.
And the question is, if we went back 50 years ago, if we had the same MRI imaging, would we be able to see the same thing? I don't think so. I actually think because kids are more dormant, the kids in our day and age, if they move, they basically move very what we call one plane like. And if they do, even if they're very active, they kind of get involved in a specific sport early on, and they use the same transformational zone. Yeah. So again, what you do is you ask the joint. You ask, let's say a hip joint gets arthritic in a younger kid. Don't ask the experts. Go ask the hip joint. Go ask the kid's hip joint. So what happened to you? Why are you pissed off? Why are you creating spurs within yourself? And it would say, because this young person isn't using me the way I was designed to be used. And I would say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, I was designed to go through beautiful extension and flexion and ab and adduction and internal and external rotation, but I was designed to do it all at the same time. I wasn't designed to sit. I wasn't designed just to do sagittal plane things. I wasn't designed to lay on a table and lift my legs straight up in the sagittal plane. I wasn't designed to just step over a hurdle in the sagittal plane. I wasn't designed to just point my hand or my leg out like a pointer dog. I was designed to twist and shout. I was designed to dance. Okay. I was designed to love life. I was designed to move in every direction. And I was designed to use all of me. So if you use only part of me, guess what? That part of me will wear down. It could be a good part of me, but it'll wear down. So if I keep hitting myself in the head in one spot, it's going to wear down. Either a spur will form out of my head or I'll get a big hole there. One of the two things my body has to do. And so every joint in the body says, I would really appreciate as a youngster if in your school programs you could teach me three-dimensional movement. Yeah. If you could teach me the joy of using my joints the way they were designed to use so I don't have to have early arthritis. We're finding here in the United States that we used to do total hips and total knees on people when they became 70 or 80. Now we're doing it at the age of 50. Yeah. And it's getting rampant. And so the question is there a cause to this? Well, William basically figured out the cause, that we're not empowering our youngsters, our kids, to enjoy the benefit of their body. So back in the good old days, if you worked out on the farm or worked in the rice paddies and you moved in all three planes of motion and your day was filled with movement, guess what? No arthritis. Yeah. Nowadays, dormant kids, and even if we do work out, we do the same thing over and over again, very traditional, kind of very sad, and we go, gee, I wonder why these poor kids are suffering from obesity, from diabetes 2, from early arthritis, from early heart disease. Well, it shouldn't be a mystery. Yeah. We know the answer. But the real question is, what are we going to do about it? Mm. So, I mean, we can give you as many answers as you want. They're all logical answers. Yeah. At the end of the day, what are we going to do in Belgium? What are you going to do in Belgium to make sure this doesn't happen to our kids? That's the question.
I think the good thing there is that we see some kind of a trend of people getting out of the gym, the classical gym, where they move only in one plane of motion and start doing CrossFit-like stuff and moving more in nature. Right. And I think it's important to create the right message for people who make the decisions, huh?
Yeah, well, again, it's messaging not only to the people in charge, but more importantly, the messaging to our kids. Because a lot of times our kids don't believe they add up. So we start with something that's very complex. A great example is our game called soccer, your game called football. You know, we'd love every kid to be able to enjoy the game of football and to be able to move and kick ambidextrously with both feet while they're running in any direction and be able to kick the ball in any direction. The real question is, have we empowered our kids to learn how to do that? We call that movement literacy. We contend we haven't. So we take a bunch of second graders, 7-year-olds here in the United States, and we, quote unquote, allow them to play soccer, or in this case, we make them play soccer. We do a follow-up study 5 years later, and only 3% of them are still playing soccer. Well, how come? Well, because if you ask the other 97%, I wasn't very good at it. I didn't kick the ball well. I couldn't move well. And so the real question is, have we given the kids the right messaging? Have we trained you to be proficient in movement literacy? Yeah. Have we taught you ABC before we expect you to be able to read a book? Yeah. And part of the messaging to kids is every kid can do it. Every kid is an athlete if they are willing to put the effort in, but they need the guidance and direction of something. And the guidance and direction has to be based on truth. But at the end of the day, the real messaging has to be, and why am I doing this? And I'll give you the hint to the answer. The answer is to be more like Leander, because you're obviously perspiring to inspire other people. So if I ask you, why are you putting all this extra time in? Why are you working your butt off? And you're saying, well, I'm giving back to trainers here in Belgium and literally trainers all over the world with the ability now to touch people, you know, through the internet. And I would say, so you're getting better in order that you can help other people get better. Is that what you just told me? And you go, exactly what I just told you. That's the messaging our kids need to hear, that we want you to be healthy or perspire in order to inspire others, to uplift others, to let others enjoy their body. We're only here for a short period of time. I mean, here's the truth about applied functional science. We're all going to die soon. Yeah. You know, relative to time eternity, whether you live to be 80 or whether you live to be 40, that ain't long. And so at the end of the day, what do we want to do about it? You know, so we would say in applied functional science, let's give a gift to our kids that's free, but inspires them to maybe change the world. Us old guys ain't going to be able to do it. But you youngsters are, and the next generation. So that's why we developed F2Pacademy.com. It's a amazing resource that we believe is going to permeate the world to teach kids movement literacy, prevent this early hip arthritis, knee arthritis, prevent fibromyalgia, prevent ACL tears, prevent obesity, prevent diabetes, prevent depression, to prevent the crap that we know is out there. and allow every child to know you're an athlete. And, you know, the reason I know that is because you're willing to learn your movement literacy. You're willing to perspire, but at the end of the day, you're doing it for the kid next to you. You're doing it to uplift them. You're doing it to help them. You're doing that to hold their hand during this journey we call life and to make them better. And that's interesting. That's why I was so excited to interview with you, because I could tell, even from your emails, your passion to help other people. So well, we need to make every child like you.
Thanks. That's a big compliment. Thank you. Willem, he shot another question at you. He says, Gary, in a lot of sports, there's a unilateral use of the body. For example, in tennis, which you brought up a lot of times this interview, or ping pong, where you play a whole game with one hand. Does this have a negative impact on the body over the long term? And is it better to create some kind of balance instead of using the same sides all the time? And how would you create that balance?
Yes, almost everything. I mean, he gave two great examples of tennis and ping pong, but we're all kind of dominant one side versus the other. And given an opportunity, even somebody who wants to be a very proficient boxer, you know, if we study them, they're probably a little tougher on one side. Somebody, obviously it's a golf ball. Even though we think it's both sides, it's really a certain motion that goes one way. Obviously this tennis player that, you know, keeps the racket in their right hand. Now what's interesting is we do use both hands. We just only have one hand on the tennis racket on the forehand. Some pros even have learned with the two hands. But William's point is, if my sport or my activity or my job or my passion or my hobby drives me into the same motion to load and explode all the time, that's one side dominant and explodes the other side dominant, like tennis might, is that ultimately detrimental to the body? Well, yes, common sense would say we need to develop some symmetry within the asymmetry. However, we still have to keep a little bit of asymmetry because the sport demands it. So there's kind of this perfect mix of, I want the person to be symmetrical. So if I looked at the facet joints in your low back and you're doing these forehand hits all day long, the facets are going to get loaded in the transverse and the frontal and the transverse in the sagittal plane all the same way. So it's just going to, one facet's just going to get beat to shreds. It makes logical sense that sometime during that training that day that I do some training to unload that facet to make that back better.
Yeah.
But not to the detriment of taking away my dominance of the tennis racket in my hand.
Yeah.
So there's a strategy that we call bioergonomics that looks at any activity and says, if you want to make that activity more functional and safer, you teach the client to go deeper into the transformational zone. You teach the client to do the mirror image of the transformational zone, which would be an unload to the opposite side. And then you teach the client to unload the transformational zone, which simply means you look at all the joints and you say, if you did that all day long, how can I make you safer? And the joints would say, well, let me go deeper and get stronger, but let me go the other way, but then unload me. And if you give me a strategy that way, I'll be able to do it until I'm 120. And so William's question is great because it has a lot of wisdom, and the answer would say we have to understand the transformational zone movement that we perceived as asymmetrical, and we have to basically come up with a strategy to make them better at that asymmetrical movement, at the same time protecting the body so it doesn't get worn out because of that over and over repetitive transformational zone load.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. Yeah. Wim asked the following question. A lot of my clients have clacking joints during exercise. Is this something they should worry about? And is there something I can do about it?
Yes. First of all, probably the answer would be no, not to worry about it. But again, as soon as we say that, then there's a click in the knee that's a torn meniscus that we need to worry about. So the hard question is, what's the clicking, the clacking coming from? And so a big question would be, as they go through it, can I identify the joint? Can you identify the movement? Do you feel like a tendon's popping? Do you feel like there's just a joint that's releasing, or is there maybe a meniscus that's getting stuck? So the first answer is not sure. But if it's the traditional, I wake up, I start walking across the floor and my feet crunchel and crack, the answer is no. But the question then would be, could I provide more mobility and stability, i.e. most stability, to the motions of the hip and the knee and the feet that would have then allowed that foot to get up and move with less clicking and clacking.
Yeah.
So then all of a sudden you go, hey, this is pretty cool, because clicking and clacking, on the surface is nothing to worry about. But if I had the choice between clicking and clacking and just no sound at all, and I could just seamlessly walk across the floor like a ballerina, I'm choosing quiet like a ballerina, and my old clicking and clacking. So actually, when I wake up in the morning, I wake up the dog with all my clicking and clacking. Okay. So it's something to take into consideration. If you can identify what it's from, that would help you. Many times we can't. And then sometimes you ask the client, is this uncomfortable at all? And then you start looking into transformational zones of the clicking and clacking and seeing if you can help them. And so you don't disregard it, but sometimes you just don't let them put a lot of weight on it. Like, oh my goodness, my joint's clicking and clacking. You don't, oh my goodness, you're probably going to die tomorrow. It's, hey, I appreciate you telling me that. Let's see if we can identify what it is. And if we can, throughout our workouts together, it would be nice if we could reduce that. And just let me know how you feel. Because at the end of the day, it's two things. How do you move and how do you feel?
Okay, Gary, I have one last question that I'm eager to ask you.
Okay.
What are the 3 books you would advise every trainer to read?
Oh,
that's
man.
A heavy one.
I love that.
You didn't see that coming, did you?
Actually, from you, I did. Because you started out with probably one of the best questions you could ask, and all your questions in the middle were the best questions you could ask.
Okay.
And you just ended up with the best question you could ask. So I'm in Belgium, and I want to read. Well, I'm a book nut. So now you're kind of putting me in a weird position. So let's see here. Well, I'm going to play my cards early here. I truly believe that function is 3-dimensional. So, and you can't deny that. It's sagittal plane, frontal plane, and transverse plane. But it's also neurological, muscular, and skeletal. Obviously, the muscular has the fascia in it. So it's also neuromuscular skeletal. Can't deny that. Yeah. It also is the flexibility system, the strength system, and the endurance system. We can't deny that. Everything that we do has a component of prevention, performance, and rehabilitation. Can't deny that. It's all 3D. I also believe, and this has to be a belief, this isn't what we would call scientific proof, but at some point every trainer has to ask this question: do you also believe that your client is mind, body, and spirit? Now, can't deny the mind part. They walk in with a body, tough to deny that part. But as soon as we say the word spirit, it scares the crap out of people. Oh my goodness, we're going into the holy roly religious thing. Now, I didn't say religious. I said, do they have something that defines them deep inside their heart? Well, that's easy. You do. I see it through your eyes. I see it through your smile. I can see it through your caring. So I see a really well put together body in Leander. I obviously know you have a brilliant mind, just even from the questions and your ability to assimilate things. But what makes you you, what makes you special, what all of a sudden makes me attracted to you is your spirit. However we define that, doesn't matter. So if that's true, then what do you want to do with their body? What do you want to do with their mind? And what do you want to do with their spirit? Because you can't separate them. So if I have an opportunity to train with you, should I be thinking about your body? Should I be thinking about giving you strategies for your mind? Or should I be thinking about encouraging your spirit? The answer is yes, I should be. So a lot of the books that we could read, we could say, well, I could refer you to some biomechanics books. Some are good, some are not. A lot of them are based on being on a table. So I'm not going to refer you to a biomechanics book. We could also go to books on, how to get the emergence of the human mind, what to do with the mind, so-so. But I would suggest if the question is, do you want to be the best personal trainer in the world? If the answer is yes, then I would say probably the very first book I would read that I think is very difficult to read, but I believe it's what I read every day because I think it allows me to understand the spirits of others and maybe more importantly, the weakness of my spirit, I don't know how dorky I am, and that's a book I call the Bible. The nice thing is you can get it anywhere. you know. So but it's hard because you read it and you go, does this apply to me? Well, if you really read it and understand, I think, the power of Jesus, Jesus would have been a good personal trainer. In fact, I think he was, because the first thing Jesus did is wanted to know how your body was. He never came at you spiritually. He wanted to know, are you warm? Do you have less pain? Can I help you with your leprosy? Can I comfort you? Can I give you food? Can I give you proper nutrition? So far, sounds like a personal trainer to me. And now then he goes, now that we've taken care of that, how can I help you with your mental strategies? What can I do to teach you to fish and not give you a fish?
Yeah.
Boy, that sounds like a personal trainer to me. And then what he wanted to do is he wanted to show compassion to your spirit. He wanted to encourage you. Sounds like a personal trainer to me. Yeah. And so I think he was a personal trainer. So you basically say that's a pretty good book to read. Yeah. Another book that I would read is probably, I think, the best book for us as movement specialists is called The Red Book of Golf. Yeah. And it's a book by the guy by the name of Harvey Penick. And it's available in multiple languages now. But Harvey passed away. Harvey, interestingly enough, was a golf coach. But in reality, he was probably the best personal trainer in the world, because he knew how the body functioned, and therefore he could get you to do whatever you wanted without telling you. Yeah. So, for instance, if I take my golf club back and I want my powerful rotators to be loaded in my right hip, he wouldn't tell you to do that. He would simply say, push your inside heel down, and that would evert the heel, drop down the talus, evert the subtalar joint, internally rotate the tibia, internally rotate the femur, and load my butt. And guess what? Just that thought process, I would hit the golf ball further. But he would always do it with positiveness, because he knew his ultimate goal was to encourage the person to not only enjoy the game of golf, but to enjoy the game of life. Yeah. So the Red Book of Golf would be a book. And then I'm biased on this one. This one's not available since I can only give you 3, I'm going to be biased on this one. And this book won't be available for 2 months. It's called Make Your Mark. So we all want to make our mark. I selfishly want to make my mark. You want to make your mark. Everybody listening to this, I already know, wants to make their mark. And the question is, how do you do that? What strategies do I do to make my mark? Because it's kind of like you make a mark in a tree, because somebody years later might come and see, Leander loves Susie, and they made their mark and made a little, heart. Yeah. But we want to make a mark in the hearts of people, not just on trees. And so how do you make your mark? It's the author is, strange enough, my son, and it's by Brad Gray. So if you go to Amazon and just type in Brad Gray, there's a book called Make Your Mark. So since I'm only allowed to give you 3, I'm going to go with the Bible, The Red Book of Golf by Harvey Penick, and Make Your Mark by Brad Gray.
Nice. Okay, thanks.
But I got 5,000 other ones I'd like to.
I'm sure of that. Yeah. Okay, Gary, thank you so much for the interview and your time. I wish you a nice weekend, and I hope we'll meet again soon.
Well, I guarantee you we're going to meet again. I'm going to make sure that happens, even if I have to come over there and bug you. Because again, you have a special gift. Even in your written word, your power of encouragement comes out. And so as soon as I read your very first email, I said, this is somebody I would love to talk with, because I could tell. And then I got onto your webpage, which is a beautiful webpage, by the way.
Thanks.
And I did some digging, and I don't know all the language, but I could pick up what you're after. And the fact that you're bringing everybody to the mix, you're bringing the best of the best in and letting us kind of figure it out, again, that's the way we should do it. We should bring everybody in and say, how do we all help each other? It's not about me, it's about our client. Hard to do because we all have an ego, but I could already tell that you and I are going to be best friends. So our paths will cross here real soon, I guarantee you.
Thank you so much. And
hey, my pleasure. And if you want to do this again, we'll do it again. But I'll get you all this information by Monday, and then let you and I just keep the email trail going, if you don't mind.
Okay,
buddy.
Thank you.
You did a wonderful job. Thanks for this opportunity.
Okay, you did too.
Thanks.
You. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey folks, next week I'm talking to Justin Price from the Biomechanics Method about all things corrective exercise. No doubt this will be another super interesting talk. So see you then. Bye.